Good afternoon, good evening, bonjour, wherever you may be. Welcome, bienvenue to this OECS SDM 2021 webinar on exploring new financial opportunities to deliver sustainable growth sectors. I am your host, and moderator, Chamberlain Emmanuel, head of the OECS Environmental Sustainability Division, right here in beautiful St. Lucia. And I am delighted to be your moderator for this insightful conversation. I trust that you have enjoyed the previous webinars of your choice, and we have for the next hour an excellent panelist, panel of panelists. But before we go and dive deeper, a few housekeeping matters. I see we have many of you already on with us. We are doing this session bilingual. So in addition to all of our English persons, we have a large French audience. And so we have a translator button, the globe button at the bottom. You can click on it and choose the French option if that is your choice. We also have available a Q&A box. If you look to the bottom of your screen, you can click on this and post your questions. We will get to those questions so that we can interact with you. We also have a chat box. So we want you to stay with us, interact with us, put in your reactions, but note we will only respond to the questions in the Q&A box. So take note of that difference. And then towards the end of our session, we want to know how you found the session. So we will be launching a poll, and we invite you please to give us your feedback, just about 5 questions, so we can keep on improving this production. I want to say a special thanks to our generous SDM 2021 partners and sponsors, the World Bank, the Global Environment Facility, the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, USAID, GIZ of Germany, the Crop and Remlet Projects, and Thoughtful Digital Agency all have made the SDM possible. So let's dig in. In addition to the sad loss of life and serious health implications that this global pandemic has exposed, it also has shown the fragility of OECS and Caribbean economies, our core sectors, private entities, and linked livelihoods. Governments, institutions, businesses, and individuals are busy trying to survive and hoping for a return to normal. But it's time to sober up. This is a new day, a new normal. And as we just heard from Jack Canfield, it could be a better normal. As the good book says, we should not pour our new wine in old wineskins. This will lead to loss and ruin. We need fresh skins for the precious new wine. Fresh thinking and imagination, new opportunities and approaches. Just as the pandemic was emerging, the OECS had been exploring a new path forward, a new green-blue economy, viable, resilient, sustainable, inclusive, responsibly leveraging our natural and creative resources for shared benefit. Without a doubt, the issue of financing is key. So far, the region's development trajectory has been synonymous with a heavy and still growing debt burden. Transitioning to a new green-blue economy approach with more sustainable growth sectors must be underpinned by innovative and sustainable financing options. So to help us solve all of our problems, no pressure, right? I am pleased to welcome and introduce our outstanding panel. We have Karen McDonald-Gale, Conservation Finance Program Manager of the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. We have Ferruccio Santetti, Regional Investment Lead for Latin America and the Caribbean of the Global Green Growth Institute, GGGI. And last but not least, Carol Elute Jamari, Regional Manager of First Citizens Investment Services Limited. Welcome, panelists, and it's great to have you on board. With over 20 years of experience in environmental project design and grant making, Karen McDonald-Gale is a regional leader with specific expertise in conservation trust fund management in the Caribbean. She held the role of USAID Jamaica Mission Environment Officer and Project Manager before moving on to the Environmental Foundation of Jamaica, where she served as CEO for 6.5 years. In her current capacity as Conservation Finance Manager at the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, Karen manages the endowment fund and coordinates the development and continued consolidation of the Conservation Trust Fund partners to the Caribbean Sustainable Finance Architecture. Based in Jamaica, Karen revels in being West Indian and loves her job and loves her job, takes her outside outside the boardroom to many natural treasures of the Caribbean and beyond. Karen, it is wonderful to have you on, and she is going to speak to us briefly on the issue of financing solutions for a green-blue economy. Welcome, Karen, and meanwhile, we invite you to begin posting your questions in the Q&A, and we will get to them after our panelists.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome, Chamberlain. It's a pleasure to be here and to be at the SDM 2021. I was asked to speak about financing solutions for a green-blue economy, and in particular, I want to tell you a little bit more about the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund and how I think it fits into that picture. So first, I in researching and trying to make sure I was sure what the green and blue economy was, there was a lot of discussion of the different colors of economies. The Caribbean is very full of lots of colors in all that we do. The Black economy talks about the illegal trade. There's a gray economy. And then, of course, the green economy, which is land-based sustainable investments, and the blue economy, which is the marine-based investments. All of those occur already in the Caribbean. And there are more. There's the brown economy and the orange economy, which talks to our creative nature. And as Chamberlain mentioned, as a West Indian at heart, it is all very relevant to what we are doing in the Caribbean. So today I want to focus on the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. The idea behind the CBF was to move from where I think a lot of us may have started in terms of our designs and thoughts for what works for conservation in the Caribbean, where we do grants and projects and work towards goals that the donors set for us and give us funding for a number of years. We want to move beyond that to sustain Caribbean conservation. That was the thinking behind the design of the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. And in particular, conservation trust funds around the world have been really soaring in what they do. In general, CTFs, as we are more commonly called, are private, legally independent institutions that mobilize resources from diverse sources and direct these resources primarily through grants to multiple nature conservation programs and projects. The CTFs themselves, the CBFs of the world and others, do not directly implement the conservation projects on our own. We mobilize the resources and then have a diverse suite of financing mechanisms to support local conservation efforts. So our goal is to make sure that the funding is there for the conservation work that needs to be done on a more regular and sustained basis. And in particular, over the past decade, conservation trust funds have expanded their historic role as funders and more increasingly become supporters of coastal ecosystems, economic livelihoods, and climate change goals. We play an important and prominent role in combining diverse funding sources government and otherwise, funders, donors, private sector, and piloting innovative financing mechanisms for conservation. Key areas of improvement for the CTFs have included the management of impact measurement and also investment measurement. So a little bit more about the CBF itself. There's a lot in the diagram. I'm of course not going through all of it, but just to let you know exactly how we are set up, we were started with support from the various donors. We currently have 2 active programs, the Conservation Finance Program and the Climate Change Program, under which the EBA facility is run. And as you can see by the dashes, we will soon have a circular economy program to go with that. And why do we have these programs? The idea behind these programs is that we will be able to find resources for islands in the Caribbean to do their work, but also for other partners in the Caribbean to do efforts that they are working on, and then to be able to do projects at the local and regional level. In particular, I want to point out that under the Conservation Finance Program, it is an endowment fund, which means that we received the principal, the capital from our donors, and we invest that capital and make payments to national conservation trust funds in the countries that you see listed there. Those countries in orange are already receiving payments from the CBF on a regular basis, and those in red and purple are following right behind. So the idea is that in each country there is a node where the work of conservation can be directed, supported, and that there is financing. And the benefit of this Caribbean sustainable finance architecture is its flexibility, that we can receive funding from a range of donors, but we are still adhering to the most strict standards and rules, internationally recognized standards for conservation funds, both in terms of investment, but also in terms of conservation impact and reporting. It also talks economies of scale, the fact that the investment, there is a single investment done for distinct cost advantages to conservation trust funds and to the various national trust funds through the regional entity. The convenience of donors and partners to be involved. The idea and the design of finance mechanisms, which I'm going to spend a little more time on because I think that is the focus of where we want to go and where we want to think some more as we have these discussions in this forum. And the idea of capacity development, both in terms of conservation, but more so in terms of designing sustainable finance mechanisms, putting together the ingredients to make what are Caribbean finance mechanisms possible. And of course, working with a range of stakeholders. The National Conservation Trust Funds in particular have on their boards government, private sector, and civil society interests in each of the countries that we work in. So leaders at the highest level already at the table for the discussions we want to have on conservation. And the idea is that makes it a stronger entity moving forward. As I mentioned very quickly on the finance mechanism ideas, we want to think outside the box. The idea is that we are creating finance mechanisms, pots of funds, pools of money that continue to build towards conservation and to go to do work on conservation on the ground. And the conservation trust funds will help with that process of hosting the funds, investing the funds, and making sure that they are well used for conservation work in the areas. Some of the ideas that you see mentioned there, green and blue credit cards have already been discussed. The idea of engaging with the boating community on marinas and voluntary and other kinds of financial mechanisms from the many visitors that we have to our marine shores. And then, of course, working with the hotel and tourism sectors on what's possible on the land side of the activities and what can be done with those. The idea of carbon offsets, and biodiversity offsets is something that's very big and a dialogue we would like to see continue. The idea of corporate social responsibility. So once you are aware of your carbon footprint, being able to have an amount that you put aside based on your carbon footprint as an industry in the region or investing in the region for conservation trust fund work to continue. And continuing some of those concepts that you see listed, water funds to create other opportunities. The concept that we have is grand. That's those listed are really just the tip of the iceberg. And the idea, as I said before, is to really make sense of what works for the Caribbean context. So I look forward to a discussion on how the National Conservation Trust Funds at the national level, the Regional Conservation Trust Fund in the CBF, and others can work together on this idea of creating finance mechanisms for conservation. And with that, I thank you all for listening, and I look forward to the discussion and questions.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Karen. That was quite interesting, short and intense and insightful. We already have some questions coming in, so it means that you have been teasing our minds so far. Okay, well, before we get to your questions, we want to hear from Ferruccio. Ferruccio Santetti is a sustainable finance professional with 10 years of experience in designing and structuring green projects and programs in developing and least developed countries. Ferruccio leads GGGI's project origination and deal structuring process across the Latin American and the Caribbean portfolio to deliver public and private finance mechanisms and bankable projects to bridge the finance gap to NDC targets. Prior to his current work, he worked as a sustainable finance specialist at UNDP, JICA, and World Wildlife Fund in Argentina, Burkina Faso, Ghana, Guatemala, Indonesia, Mexico, Singapore. So we have someone who has a wide range of experience, and he will be addressing exploring new financial opportunities to deliver sustainable growth sectors by showcasing some practical innovations that is dealing with GGGI. So Ferro, over to you and welcome.
Thank you, Chamberlain, and thank you, Karen, for the presentation. It was very interesting, and again, looking forward to having a discussion with the participants and with the rest of the members of the panel. So during the next 10 minutes, we're going to be looking at different alternative financing instruments or means that can help governments raise long-term finance to implement and pursue priority climate change adaptation and mitigation actions. We consider this to be a very relevant and current topic, given the impact that the COVID-19 has had on the economy of all Caribbean countries, right? Contributing to deteriorate their fiscal situation and making Latin America and the Caribbean the most indebted region in the developing world. All of this happening in a moment where many of the countries in the regions are already paying a high price in terms of a climate crisis and a biodiversity crisis that is costing hundreds, if not millions of dollars, billions of dollars for the countries in the region. And here, to make things worse, and I'm sorry to start on such a dreadful note, in a moment where official development aid has been declining steadily over the past 5 or so years. So the first instrument that we're going to be looking into is the increasingly famous, I wouldn't say popular, since we haven't really seen it implemented on a large scale yet, debt for climate swap. So this is an instrument that it derives from the successful debt for nature swaps that were implemented a few decades ago. And what we are looking at here in this slide is not your average bilateral debt for climate swap, but rather an instrument that the Green Climate Fund has been conceptualizing and has been pushing in the recent past. So this is really a three-party funding mechanism where we have a developing country, a creditor, and the Green Climate Fund. The creditor country would transfer its creditor rights under outstanding sovereign debt into the Green Climate Fund. The GCF would then collaborate with a developing country to convert this money into local currency and then make this funding available through different modalities to the developing country at the project level in order to allow for the implementation of priority mitigation and or adaptation projects. So the advantage here of involving the GCF into this transaction is really that in addition to providing immediate debt relief from the debt for climate swap, the GCF itself can also blend its own resources and increase the volume of finance that the developing country would receive to pursue its mitigation and or adaptation ambitions. And among many other advantages that you can see listed here, one really strikes, and it's the fact that this funding can be made available in local currency without having to bear conversion costs of USD or other foreign currency investments. And this funding can be utilized as a credit enhancement or as a guarantee to catalyze additional funding on a project level from local financial institutions or investors. And moving on to a second alternative, looking into thematic bonds, and what I'm referring to here with thematic bonds is mostly green, social, sustainable bonds, but also resilience and SDG-linked bonds. Right, this is also an increasingly popular instrument. This is a market that has been growing exponentially over the last decade. And despite this fast growth, Latin America and the Caribbean region still represents only a small share of the global market, and Central America and the Caribbean only accounts for a 0.1% of the global market. So while this, on the one hand, would suggest that thematic bonds might not be a good fit for the region, on the other hand, it also makes the region or issuances from the region very attractive for investors. They, in fact, in addition to offering attractive returns or yields, they also represent an interesting or valuable diversification opportunity for international investors. And there are other reasons to be optimistic and to think that thematic bonds could be a viable and interesting instrument for both the public and private sector to raise long-term finance. And this comes from the greater clarity surrounding thematic bonds. Right? There has been a lot of work from the International Capital Market Association, from the Climate Bond Initiative, and many other organizations to define eligibility criteria, processes, and taxonomies to help provide a greater trust and confidence about this funding actually being earmarked to sustainable projects. And in general, we also see a growing interest from the private sector. And in the future, and it's already happening today, we see that private sector already accounts for the majority of issuances worldwide. So thematic bonds come with a number of advantages that make it particularly interesting for governments. The first one being the so-called greenium. So a pricing advantage that derives from the high demand that exists in international markets for this type of bonds. Secondly, the fact that proceeds that are raised from a thematic bond issuance are earmarked, are committed to sustainable low carbon development strategies and projects, right? And in this sense, they are immune from political uncertainties or changes in government direction. And finally, they can give governments the opportunity to tap into different and new investors that are not yet exposed to their external debt, representing therefore an interesting diversification opportunity. So the main steps to consider potential issuance would be, first of all, to verify that the preconditions for an issuance are in place. So conducting a cost-benefit analysis to ensure that a thematic bond is, in fact, the most cost-effective way of raising finance. Ensuring that the government has made clear its public commitment to utilizing these funds for environmentally and socially sustainable projects. And finally, verify that the legal, regulatory, and financial requirements are satisfied. In order to issue a thematic bond, a government or any issuer must ensure that they follow a thorough internal process to define the objective of the issuance, define the use of proceeds, define the process for project evaluation and selection. And to do that, the International Capital Market Association often recommends the establishment of a committee or a round table that can be in charge of this decision and oversee that the proceeds are actually invested in a manner that is aligned with market standards. And interestingly, there are a number of technical assistance initiatives that are available in the region and across the world, from multilateral development banks, from international organizations, from the GCF itself, that emerging economies can tap into in order to receive technical assistance to implement and enter the market. And here, a final instrument. This is not per se an instrument to raise financing, but public-private partnerships represent an interesting way and a cost-effective way for governments to involve the private sector in the financing and then in the risk management of large infrastructure projects, right? And this is very interesting and very relevant in today's discussion, given the limited fiscal space the countries have to pursue priority adaptation and mitigation initiatives. And as you know, at the core of a PPP scheme, you really have a risk allocation, right? This is where the effectiveness of a PPP comes from, is having the private sector be in charge of life cycle risks. And what happens today in the great majority of jurisdictions, climate risk is not directly addressed in PPP regulations. And because of this, what happens is that at the end of the day, in the case of climate disasters, it's really the users and taxpayers that are the ones that end up absorbing the losses and the cost of replacement of critical infrastructure assets. So what I'm trying to advocate for here is the need to look at or to put in place a paradigm shift where environmental, social, and climate change considerations are included into PPP processes. And the way of doing this, right, so far today, what we have a number of measures that sort of indirectly address climate risk into PPPs, and you can see some of this here, relief and compensation, insurance, and others. But what these do, most of them look at climate risk in a ex post kind of point of view, and they don't really contribute to building resilience into the assets or into the contract. So what we need is to put in place or to pursue a paradigm shift where, for example, we would try to align policies, climate change policies that many countries have, PPP policies that many countries have, but few countries actually have put efforts into aligning and harmonizing these two policies. A second approach of achieving this result could be to implement process modifications into PPP, trying to integrate adaptation and resilience into the appraisal framework, or generally trying to build more flexibility into PPP processes. And I think I'll stop here for now, but I look forward to discussing this during the Q&A session. Thank you, Chamberlain.
And thank you, Pharaoh. That was, again, very informative. And I can see already tremendous alignment with what Karen presented. And we're setting up for an excellent conversation already. And again, want to welcome those of you who may have joined us a little late, and inviting you to continue to post your questions in the Q&A, and to also give us your reactions in the chat. And we will be getting to you just in a moment. Now we will shift gears a little. We have heard from the CBF, we have heard from GGGI as those global and regional institutions. Now let's hear from the private sector. So we want to bring on now Carol Jamari. She's a financial advisor, strategic thinker, and solution-based C-suite executive and finance consultant with over 30 years of senior level experience. Her extensive career spans the fields of banking, finance, auditing, and investment brokerage. Amongst her many contributions and achievements, which I will not list, she has held the title of First Female, which is the one I love, in several prestigious organizations. First female CEO of the First Citizens Bank of Barbados Limited, first female ACCA International Assembly representative for the Caribbean and the Americas, and first female chairperson of the Caribbean Association of Banks. So if I may, welcome First Lady. Carol will share her insights on indigenous, inclusive, and innovative investments for financing this transition. Over to you, Carol.
Thanks. Thank you, Chamberlain, and thanks, Karen and Ferucia, for setting the stage that I now have to follow through and try to use my perspective in the financial services sector from the private banking and investing perspective, which I plan to share with you this afternoon. So why is my slide not advancing?
We can see it.
Is it advancing on your side?
Not yet. So probably stop share and share again. That might solve it.
Stop share. Share again. It's not advancing. Okay, let me see if I can do the other. Let me stop share. Share. And then
okay, while you do that, we're inviting our audience. Keep on putting your questions. We have time for wonderful dialogue, so we'll be monitoring your questions.
okay, let's see if this works now. Share screen. I have no idea why it's not advancing.
Okay, well, I guess we just need to speak through it probably.
Yes, yes, yes. I think that perhaps this is the better thing to do. Okay, so basically, I don't think that any of us have any issues with accepting the concept that preserving the environment and minimizing the impacts of hurricanes and other natural disasters are vital for the sustainable existence of our Caribbean small island nations, many of which are highly dependent on natural resources through tourism, because we are a tourism industry, agriculture, fishing, transportation, or other service-related industry. And whilst these are all viable industries, and there may be lots of idle or what we deem unproductive liquidity in the financial services sector, with some investors continuing to search the globe for profitable ventures, there are various challenges ranging from the size of our very location which will continue to plague and limit the region's financing options for green or blue transition. Our reality as small island states is that we are small open economies and we are vulnerable to natural disasters. Equally, the increasing prevalence and strength of hurricanes, storms, and other disasters has created for us economic and structural issues. And many islands have ended up being really debt-ridden or with debt burdens from their recovery efforts post-national disasters. All of these are huge concerns for financial institutions and investors alike. And so that tends to make us and our region not very attractive from investor perspective. We also see the magnitude of these problems make it difficult or near impossible for several of our small islands to dedicate financial resources to lessening the impacts of climate change on their natural environments, or even more difficult it becomes for them to properly manage their debt burden or adequately invest in environmental protection initiatives, which are critical. We also see a challenge for our small islands in that the risk-return dilemma which they face is such that the level of risk that is involved in taking on the blue economy initiatives and investments vis-a-vis the returns that could be directly linked or tied to the outpouring of capital is normally not that easily identifiable. And if it is identifiable, it tends to lag the outlay by an indeterminable future timeline, in that you know what you have to do in terms of your capital outlay, but in terms of when the returns or the revenue streams are going to come in, there tends to be huge long delays. And these typically are conditions that do not make those investments attractive for banks in particular. And some key investors or financiers tend to find that to wait long term to get some returns tend to be unattractive. And so they go after those with a quicker turnaround time. So given these financing challenges and the necessary existence of the ocean for our own human survival, it is therefore critical for local and regional financiers to position themselves to sustainably finance the green blue economy. Much of the research work has shown that the health of our nation is at risk and perhaps under existential threat. And given the magnitude of the issues and the size of the blue economy, stakeholders are clear in their heads and in their minds that there could be no meaningful progress at addressing the issue without private sector involvement and collaboration. And I think I heard that coming out as a theme earlier today from some of the presentations that I was able to attend. Particularly banks. It is felt that banks play a critical role and need to be involved in that collaboration. Insurers also have a critical role to play where that is concerned. They, in terms of financing and transitioning to sustainable blue economy, the fact that banks have been integrally involved in most of the investor and investing of our region, they are a natural fix to help, a natural nexus to help support the transition to green blue economy. The UN Environmental Program, the Finance Initiative, prepared a publication in early this year in March, which actually reported that 2/3 of our oceans have been negatively altered by human activity, leaving industries, businesses and livelihoods exposed as they face the impact of pollution, which is a big issue for us and our ocean, nature loss from degradation, and climate change. And financial institutions therefore can and should play a pivotal role in developing a sustainable blue economy so as to not simply provide funding, but also to safeguard the very asset and livelihood needed to continue business operations into the future. Because without a sustainable blue economy, without the safeguard of our oceans and the marine economy, there will be no business, there'll be no assets that the bank would have funded in the first place. Financial institutions are the traditional source of finance for most industries, and therefore they are able to influence transformation and change through client relationship and engagement during the funding process. The UN report, which I referred to earlier, presented a pivotal guidance to assist financial institutions, banks in particular, with the decision to undertake investments in ocean health. So the report looked at some core sectors of the economy and particularly aimed at assisting banks in terms of what to look for, what type of questions to ask, and what type of factors should drive the decision to invest or not to invest. And the initial report presented 5 initial sectors, and all of these 5 initial sectors I think are very relevant to us as small open economies. And these 5 sectors identified are: 1, seafood, which is really fishing, aquaculture, and the associated supply chain. According to the World Trade Organization, seafood is the mostly highly traded food commodity globally. And what the World Trade Organization has seen is that there's an annual growth rate of about 4% over the last 5 years of fishing and fish farming and fish-related activity. For us in the region, I think we can say that it is no different, because seafood, fishing, aquaculture, and the supply chain is a vital source of income, employment, and food security for many, many of our economies and many of our islands. So, but however, financing for fishing, seafood, and aquaculture type industry tends to be limited from the banking sector, given the volatile nature of the products, and in particular, no pun intended, the floating nature of the asset. Because banks tend to like capital that they can hold on to. They like capital that they can see, that they know where it is located at any point in time. Additionally, many of the market players in our seafood sector, in our fishing sector, tends to be small or medium seagoers. And as a result, the availability of capital, the availability of security that the financial services sector tends to look for tends to be slim or non-existent. The other sector that the UN report looked at is the ports. Ports are generally a gateway for development, for global trade, and for marine innovation. And often, ports tend to be categorized based on their primary customers, and their primary customers being the containers, the fuel tankers, your cruise ships, your fishing vessels, your private vessels, your mariners, your transportation hubs that they facilitate. And usually the level of port activity in any country is typically a good reflection of the economic progress of that country. However, a thriving port tends to present numerous opportunities for innovation and numerous opportunities for green-blue economy transition. As there would be opportunities for technology, there would be opportunities for carbon emission reduction, air pollution reduction. There will be opportunities to look at things like efficiency in the operations and numerous opportunities to help drive the green-blue transition. And so in funding of ports and port activities, local and regional financiers have a wealth of opportunities to tilt the scales in the right direction towards a sustainable green-blue transition through innovative mandates. And by that, I'm saying they could include KPIs, key performance indicators, such as resource efficiencies, labor management and savings, risk reduction, and other key ratios as part of their arrangements for funding and for policy directions going forward, including areas such as waste management reduction. The third area that the UN report considered has to do with marine transportation. And marine transportation addresses the vessels and infrastructure that drive global trade and regional trade, including the fishing industry, passenger transportation, and tourism. Transportation, marine transportation in particular, is one key area for us where we have a deficiency from a regional perspective. And this is a great opportunity for financiers now to consider how, if we are going to go into this now in a big way, to consider the blue transition going forward. Fourthly, the report considered the marine renewable energy. And in as much as we have been slow off the mark with our solar energy and our renewable energy from the green economy, we have the opportunity now to really fast track or catch up with our marine renewable energy initiative. And that would be notably with respect to offshore wind energy. A lot of our countries have begun considering renewable energy opportunities, and the timing now as far as opportunities for not just investors, but market players is rife in that there are significant opportunities where we can, through economies of scales and collaboration throughout the region, foster and invest in projects that facilitate blue economy, the blue economy's movement towards marine renewable energy. And the last area that is considered by that report is the coastal and marine tourism, including cruising. We all know and saw what the COVID-19 pandemic has done to the cruise industry. But as we all know, wherever there is a crisis, there are numerous opportunities to come out of it. And so right now it's the time to reinvent cruising, to reinvent the industry. So the issues that we had, waste management and water production, those were core areas of concern for the cruise industry. There now becomes opportunities to reinvent with the blue economy in mind, and then present to financial investors, financiers, and banking propositions to help pivot the blue economy. And in conclusion,
we lost you on screen, but also, yes, as you wrap up, yes.
Okay. In conclusion, if we were to consider inclusive and innovative investments for financing the green-blue economy, there would be many. Some we have already spoken of, but typically my recommendation would be for us to begin looking at new innovative debt repayment and capital structures. So there is room for us to look at repayment that's linked to sales, to inventory, or maritime ventures. There is also room to consider regional transportation and the efficiencies presented for the region. Also, innovative project bonds. We now have a thriving market through the ECSC that deals with corporate bonds and government bonds. And now is the opportunity to consider private bonds. We also have the opportunity for debt discount or buyback through public funding, corporate paper, equity funding, especially utilizing our junior market, which is so heavily underutilized, and of course the green-blue bonds that we have spoken of throughout the course of today and yesterday. I thank you.
All right, wonderful. Certainly lots and lots of opportunities and to think about. And so we can have some discussion right now. We have a few questions. I will ask Pharaoh and Karen to come back into the discussion. And Karen, I will throw this first one at you. In fact, as I monitored the chats and the Q&A, I can see we had several persons who are asking, hey, is this available in my country? You know, what is the landscape? Who do you serve in the region? And also, is it only dealing with governments formally? Can communities, you know, and other groups get involved and see the benefits? Dr.
Thanks. Yes, I did see those questions. And in fact, I was trying my best to avoid the individual discussions. Because there are a number of funding streams through CBF, there are a number of ways to be involved. The National Conservation Trust Funds are the ones that work with the countries listed in the program that are there. And those all have individual trust funds. So for the question for Jamaica, there is a National Conservation Trust Fund of Jamaica that is up and running and receiving funding from CBF and you can receive funds there. Through the EBA facility, which now has a call open, and I encourage everyone to go to the website, www.caribbeanbiodiversityfund.org. The ecosystem-based adaptation facility gives its funding through grants. Through grants, it is a sinking fund and it is targeted at climate change missions. So we do have a range of activities for those not specifically mentioned under those EBA, for example, grant making facilities, which is targeted towards the countries that were ODA qualified at the time that we received the funding from the German government. The idea of regional partnerships are most definitely, as we've been hearing, encouraged. And indeed, so if the question for Trinidad, my response was that you can be based in Trinidad, but the projects have to have some impact in the countries we are directly working in, as well as if it has an impact in Trinidad. But the idea, as I mentioned for the presentation, was the regional aspect, the idea of how can we find more ways of working together, more activities, and how the CBF can facilitate that. In terms of whether we work with governments, we are ourselves a private institution, as are our National Conservation Trust Funds. But indeed, in particular, the National Conservation Trust Funds are established with boards of directors that are a mixture of government leaders and decision makers, private sector leaders and decision makers, and civil society entities. The requirement for CBF is that the majority of the board of directors be NGO, not non-governmental, but indeed the leaders and protected areas managers, marine-based managers of the various governments in the countries we work with are on those boards and help with the decision-making of the grants that we award at those national levels.
All right, thanks. Very informative indeed. Pharaoh, I could not help but recall something you said, that a couple of those instruments are famous but not popular. That was a real teaser for me. I guess we know about them, but it seemed that they have not really worked, so to speak. And so the question really is why? You know, when someone is asking, you know, is it a matter of fit? If it does not fit well the circumstance of our SIDS, of our small island states, of our you know, and other Caribbean countries, why haven't we twisted the models to better fit the circumstance? So pressure is on you. Over to you.
Thanks. I'll try to answer this, but I would also really like to hear from Karen and Carol on this. I saw the question was specifically on thematic bonds. So the issuance of a thematic bond involves essentially the same process that you would go through to issue a vanilla bond, to issue a traditional bond. So the first question should really be, is bond the right way for me to raise debt, right? And if we look at the financing plan, many governments in the region utilize bonds issued in domestic markets to raise debt. So the first answer would be that theoretically, yes, you can issue a thematic bond in a domestic original market. So really the difference that you would have, in addition to a financial process, you have an extra financial process that it can be a green, social, or sustainable process, right? And that involves some additional transaction costs, right? You need to develop a framework, which is a publicly available document that discloses information about what is the use that you're going to do of the funds, what is the process that you are implementing to ensure that you're utilizing the funds for that specific purpose, what is the governance structure, what is the monitoring and reporting commitments of the government or the issuer. So there are certainly some additional costs that go into developing this framework and all the work that goes into developing the pieces of this framework. And in addition to that, you need to certify the framework, or better, you should certify the framework. You should seek a certification or a second party opinion from a verifier. So there are additional costs. And so I would think, from my perspective, the question could also be, how can you lower this transaction cost? And today there are many technical assistance programs that offer this type of support. As we all know, countries can access Green Climate Fund funding, and here before I hear here boo and bureaucracy. I don't mean accessing developing funding proposal. I mean utilizing readiness resources. Each country has access to up to $1 million a year in readiness funding. And this funding can be utilized to structure debt for climate swaps. It can be utilized to structure thematic bonds. So this could be a first way of lowering these transaction costs. Many multilateral development banks also have technical assistance programs or facilities that look into this space in terms of providing technical assistance funding to design and structure bonds. And this also has the advantage that by receiving support from a multilateral development bank, you can also then consider private placement directly with them. And again, there are many other technical assistance programs that can support this process. We have the LAC Green Finance Facility, right, financed by the International Climate Initiative and implemented by the Inter-American Development Bank. GGI itself, we also have a technical assistance program. Today, it was announced the establishment of a new Korean Green New Deal Trust Fund that can provide this type of support. So I think some of the preconditions are there in the slide, but also what I guess the message that I would like to share is that support is available, and there are many international organizations that can help issuer lower some of this transaction cost and provide some more clarity around use of proceeds, taxonomies, and monitoring and reporting commitments that many times can scare off prospective issuer.
Yeah, thanks. And I know I'm watching the clock, but I want to just stretch this one out a little. So Karen, I don't know if you want to jump in, because I think we're still trying to grapple with all of that assistance available, with etc. Why are the numbers still so low, say in our region? Is it the capacity? Is it lack of interest? Why you mentioned numbers, Pharaoh, as is it 1% or 0.1%? So what's happening? Because we need, if we're talking about sustainable financing, and these are excellent tools, we need to know the secret of how do we get more of it done in the region.
So I will start on the positive note. That is that we have done some debt swaps in the Caribbean. The debt for nature swaps that were done in the 1990s, are way back. but that set up some of the original conservation trust funds that I know of and worked with, certainly in the Caribbean region. Moving forward to today and the answer to your question, those took time, a lot of effort and a lot of time. And I think Pharaoh is right. The idea of putting the different energies and information together is hard. And I see where in a lot of the settings that I am in, the strength, I don't want to say our capacity is weak. I'm not a big fan of that term. We have it in the Caribbean region, but what we don't have is the time with the number of personnel that we have to focus on the various range of issues. And what I heard Pharaoh saying that I think is important for us to take away is that we should reach out to those agencies with technical support and use some of the examples that we know are available to us. And I think as well, to put a quick plug that there are other examples across the waters in the Pacific of islands managing with various types of funds and bond structures that are working. So we have to Caribbeanize it in a way that makes sense for us to go forward. But I think at the moment there is limited space, and space means time for the people that need to do the research to make it what we want it to be for the Caribbean. And I think we need to be sure to ask for the technical assistance if it is there from persons like Pharaoh and the teams that he has mentioned.
Wonderful. Carol, you haven't escaped, and I know we have just a few minutes, a couple of minutes left, and while you respond to that question, we can also put up the poll. But Carol, it's while we are, I guess, grappling with these instruments and want to accelerate them, it is said that the indigenous or Caribbean financial institutions are sitting on lots and lots of cash and capital. So is it an opportunity to unpack these? What would it take? What is the appetite for investing in the green blue economy in the region?
Yes, as I did mention that it is true, but banking in its raw form is not a high risk industry. And typically, although there is a lot of liquidity, the very nature of these types of investments and the risk associated with it makes banks typically want to shy away from it. The banks have been highly liquid for the last 5, almost 10 years, and yet still the investments are not flowing out. Typically, if you have a project which is viable and you have the associated capital, the banks are eager for it, but the industry tends to come forward with high risk without supported capital and uncertain flows, revenue flows to guarantee a repayment ability. Hence the reason why I'm saying that there is need now to be a little bit more innovative with the revenue flows and the repayment flows to facilitate taking up some of those opportunities.
Okay, wonderful. So it means there is wonderful opportunity in the traditional space. There is opportunity in the innovative financial space, but we have some work to do. We need to do some redesigning, and we need to have a deeper conversation and in both spaces to be able to leverage that. Wow, how time flies when you are having fun. I almost got lost in my own self there, and the clock is screaming at me. And so we really need to bring this conversation to a pause, not a close. I would say a pause because the conversation really continues. And this was just a teaser, and we want you to continue to stay connected with us. There are other linked conversations that will continue on SDM 2021. And as we continue, we are not yet done for day one. We still have in prime time at 5:30 p.m. our time, a 2-hour session on regional dialogue on access to climate finance, facilitating access to climate and environmental finance for resilience and adaptation to climate change. So there's a strong link here. So if you have this interest, come back at 5:30. And then we will have an exciting pulling down of the curtain at 7:30 p.m. I really want to thank our panelists, Karen, Carol, and Patricio, for your excellent insights. And we certainly have some great takeaways. I want to invite the audience, if you have not yet done so, to please fill out the poll. Take a minute and fill out the poll, just about 5 or 6 questions, so that you can help us to serve you better. And also, in the break between now and you coming back at 5:30, you can continue to browse the platform, visit the many virtual exhibits, fill your swag bag, connect with presenters and participants, and make this, make the best of this opportunity. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. This is a unique forum, and get onto the rest of the platform and make the best of it. Thanks again to our team at the OECS. Thanks to all of our partners and sponsors and friends. And I wish you a wonderful evening. Bye for now.